We all knew this was going to happen. This one had to be done. We have to do Toshiki Yamamoto. Toshiki has one of the most aesthetic back squats in the entire history of the barbell back squat. Now there is few who compare to the quantity of this man's squat, and fewer still who can compare to the quality. Toshiki competes as an 89 kilo lifter for the land of the rising sun, where he achieved his best accolade in 2019 by winning the gold medal in the clean and jerk at the World Championships. Some of Toshiki's most notable lifts are a 321 kilo back squat, 300 for 3 back squat, and a 230 kilo block clean. There are some great components to Toshiki's back squat, and some of these are going to be very useful for you to take and apply to your own squat. But I just want you to get one thing clear before we get going. Your squat won't look like Toshiki's after this video, for reasons that will become clear by the end. I know, don't click off just yet though, there's still much to learn. So let's start with Toshiki's bar position. This is one of the most important changes you can bring to your squat from Toshiki's. The label of high bar squat often misleads individuals into placing the barbell as high as possible, unfortunately assuming that the bar needs to be at the base of the neck, on the vertebrae such as C7 or even C6. This flaw is one of the most common mistakes and has some of the biggest repercussions for the average high bar squat. If you imagine your spine as a seesaw with your hips on one end and your upper body with the barbell at the other, as you squat down, sit in the bottom of the squat, or simply just stand up straight, the barbell is imparting force primarily forward towards the anterior. This can be referred to as the sagittal plane of motion when referring to the body's ability to move in a particular direction. If we were to imagine the seesaw in terms of vectors and directions of force, your hips would be the pivot point, your back is the arm, and the barbell's desire to move forward is the direction of force. Your upper body requires an opposing force to resist the pivoting forward of your torso. This of course isn't so bad when standing with an unloaded barbell, but with a barbell twice the mass of your body, the force required to stand still are incredibly demanding. Now imagine the forces required to maintain this position as you move through a full range of motion squat. As you move through the squat, your lower body facilitates the upper body's upright torso, and to varying degrees, a lifter can maintain a more or less upright torso. Now imagine your back as the lever again. The longer the lever, the more weight at the end of the lever, the harder it is to resist the pivoting of the back around the hips. Now if we disregard your head and only imagine the end of the lever where the barbell is placed. So the further down your back the barbell goes, the shorter the lever, the further down the weight, we're reducing what's known as the torque. The less torque, the easier it is to maintain an upright torso. Now the body is a complex and highly reactive machine, so any changes in the barbell position can have huge changes. So what does this have to do with Toshiki's back squat? Well, Toshiki has the perfect bar placement for someone high bar squatting. Toshiki places the bar in what we refer to as the hybrid bar position, which falls under the entire system for the Sika squat. Just the slightest movement of the bar further down can allow you to maintain a far more upright torso. We're not talking low bar west side, simply imagine the bars needing to be approximately level with your AC joint. This allows us to stand upright and not have to lean forward to balance the bar like we would in a low bar squat. This hybrid bar position allows us to maintain a high degree of upper back tightness, which is essential to maintain the upright torso. When trying this at home, move the bar by degrees and video your squat from a side-on angle and from a rearward angle. Look to see if the consistencies of your torso angle remains the same or if it changes while still being upright when you go through a full depth squat. From the rearward angle, also look for a change in the flexion or extension of your upper back muscles depending on the bar position. The characteristic style of Toshiki squat comes mainly from his favourable lever lengths. The main lever lengths we look at in the back squat are firstly the length of the torso or the length of the spine, and secondly the length of the femur. We have some tertiary lengths we look at also, such as the ratio of the femur length to the tibia or fibia, and the ratio of the humerus to the radius in the arm, as this mainly revolves around the upper back position. For Toshiki squat, the real ratio we need to look at is the ratio of torso length to femur length. Toshiki has an incredible way of sitting his hips directly over his heels while ensuring to keep his knees relatively over his toes and his torso very upright and vertical. This is a position which is inherently difficult for almost everyone to sit into. Even if you take someone very well built for squatting, such as myself for example, I will achieve the position of shoulders over hips and hips over heels by pushing my knees very far in advance of my toes. I will have my knees slightly pushed out, but the main method of travel is the knees going straight over my toes. This doesn't really happen in Toshiki squat due to the relatively short femur length and his incredible ability to externally rotate his hips. So when I sit into my squat, I slightly externally rotate my hips so I can have an amount of extension of my lower back, and then as I sit down, my hips are enabled to sit directly on top of my heels by my knees pushing directly forward. But when Toshiki sits down, this hip travel is facilitated by his legs essentially pushing out of the way by largely externally rotating. When we look at Toshiki's squat from the side, you will see that the knees traveling rarely go too far forward. And this is a very unique in the world of Aztec RAS weightlifters squatting. So what can you learn from this if you don't have these crazy morphological attributes? Well, the first thing I think we should look at is the width of his stance. Toshiki stands with a relatively wide stance, particularly for a weightlifter, and he stands with a stance that isn't overly toes out when we see weightlifters squatting in a similar movement pattern to Toshiki. Usually we'll see toes pointed out at an almost 45-degree angle. This is necessitated by the extreme amount of external rotation we see in the hips. Toshiki is able to maintain this relatively normal toe position due to his pretty insane morphology. If you're a taller lifter, widening your stance somewhat can allow you to achieve this lower depth squat while still maintaining this upright torso, as the wider we stand, the easier it is for our hips to travel straight down, essentially creating more room for our hips in the squat. Finally, a major attribute of Toshiki's squat is his level of control. So for an 89 kilo lifter, he is squatting incredibly heavy weights. We rarely see Toshiki in that kind of compromised or very poor position back squat. We all see him with the same levels of control regardless of the weight. Both his descent and ascent of the squat, we rarely see him dive bombing through squats or losing control or becoming a vibrating mess as he tries to stand up the weights. If you're somebody looking to have a more aesthetic squat or just looking to gain more control, you should look at the kind of tempo Toshiki squats with it. It's not too slow, nor is it too fast. It's always in control, and we rarely see him training with excessively heavy bars when he becomes very ropey or shaky during heavy back squats. As always, this squat series is brought to you by the Road to Your Back Squat program. It is 8 weeks in length, 2 sessions per week, and it is, of course, very tough, especially week 4, day 2, but it is an incredibly productive program, and I would encourage you to get on it to make some great gains on your back squat.